Welcome back to another episode of With a Grain of Salt. I am your host, Isaiah Salter, and I appreciate each and every one of you for tuning in for yet another week. For those watching, I don't know if you could tell, but your boy is using a new desk. I like this one a little better. So the last one I was using, it was a good desk, but it was more of like not really a desk, but more of like a shelf, if that makes sense. It didn't really have a lot of room underneath for my feet to go under, so this new and aligned desk is what we needed. But anyway, that's besides the point. I hope everybody's doing amazing. I hope everybody's last week was good, and you're continuing to take steps in the right direction. And maybe last week was a little rough. Maybe you took steps in a direction that isn't as aligned. Maybe you drifted in certain areas. That's okay. That's what we're going to talk about today on this podcast. Today's podcast episode is called Graceful Growth. On this journey of being the best version of yourself, there are going to be moments where you don't always make the aligned decisions, where you begin to drift a bit, where you experience some stagnation or a setback. But one of the most important keys to remember is that those things are not the opposite of your growth, but actually a part of it. So the question comes down to, how can we learn to navigate those moments and periods in a more elevated way so that we are feeding our growth and not taking from it? So that we are feeding our growth and not taking from it. Growth doesn't demand perfection. It just asks for presence, for honesty, for the ability to take the next right step, even when it's uncomfortable. And that step, it gets even more powerful when it's paired with grace, because accountability without grace turns into shame, and grace without accountability turns into avoidance. But when the two work together, you create momentum that's both honest and sustainable. You don't just move forward, you grow forward with intention, with love, and with discipline that doesn't destroy you but build you. Come on. And that's why we titled it Graceful Growth, because that idea of learning how to hold yourself accountable, but with grace, is so important. It's been on my mind a lot because I see so often either people are constantly trying to hold themselves accountable without any sense of grace, and it just turns into shame and guilt and beating themselves down. Or you see the opposite end where people are constantly giving themselves quote unquote grace, but it's really just avoidance and it's excuses, and it's actually not helping you at all. And so how can we bridge that gap and create a nice synergy between holding ourselves accountable, but also giving ourselves grace, because we are human beings and we were not made to be perfect. And perfection is not a prerequisite for growth. It's actually the opposite of growth. If you're trying to be perfect, you're probably not growing, because when you're growing, you're in the mindset of understanding that I'm going to make mistakes, I'm going to mess up, sometimes I'm going to drift. But it's in those moments where, with the right perspective, with awareness, with intention, I definitely just said with twice. Where with intention, you could bring yourself back on track. What a tongue twister. It's all right though. But yeah, so I hope this podcast episode resonates with the people who need it, and let's get into it. Point number 1, grace is not an excuse, it's a foundation. Many people confuse grace with letting yourself off the hook, but grace isn't about avoiding responsibility. It's about holding yourself accountable without shame. It's the fuel that keeps you going, especially after a misstep. Grace is not an excuse, it's a foundation. Right? Grace is a foundation to be built upon, right? It's a strong foundation for your growth, for your development, for your evolution, because you're not always going to do everything perfect. Sometimes you are going to drift and make mistakes, right? But it's not an excuse. Grace isn't there for an excuse. It's there for a foundation to be built off. A lot of people use grace as a form of avoidance, right? So I keep letting myself off the hook, or I'm just giving myself grace. And it's like you have to have that balance of accountability and not beating yourself up, right? But you do have to be real with yourself, right? It's about holding yourself accountable without shame. Because if you're trying to hold yourself accountable, but you're constantly beating yourself down, feeling guilty, shame is, kind of clouding your life, it's not going to be productive accountability. It's going to actually take you away from what you should be doing. It's going to make you feel worse. And when you feel worse about yourself, you do things that are aligned with that feeling worse about yourself, right? So you're more susceptible to drifting or making a mistake or doing something that isn't aligned because you don't even feel good about yourself, right? It's really, really hard to, and this is something that I realized early on in my journey, but it's really, really hard to better yourself and want to be better and want to, strive to achieve the best version of yourself when you don't feel good about yourself, right? Now, at the beginning, that's usually where most people start. It's right. I don't feel good about myself. I don't feel good about my life, right? I don't really like what I'm seeing. And that kind of initiates some change or initiates some fire within us, and that leads to us taking steps down that change. But as you start to go down that journey, you start to realize very quickly that, hold on, if I don't have a healthy relationship with myself, right? If I don't value myself, if I don't like myself, right? If I'm not at peace with who I am, it's going to be very, very, very difficult for me to grow into the best version of me. It's going to be very difficult for me to do the things that I know are required for me to be the best for me in my journey, right? But when you create that limited loop of not feeling good about yourself, doing things out of not feeling good about yourself, and then now you're, in shame or guilt about the thing that you just did, and that shame or guilt makes you feel worse about yourself, and now it just creates this cycle of you're just constantly acting out of feeling worse about yourself, out of that guilt, out of that shame, right? It says, shame says, I'm a mistake, I'm no good. Grace says, I made a mistake. Let me reflect and grow from this. Right? Make sure you can differentiate that. And that's a great indication of where the internal conversation is coming from, right? If when you make a mistake, you're so quick to say to yourself, I'm a mistake, I'm no good, right? That's rooted in shame. That's rooted in guilt, right? True grace says, I made a mistake, but let me learn, reflect, and grow from this. Two totally different things, right? The same mistake, two totally different foundations. Is your foundation built on shame and guilt or built on true, honest grace? And you're the only person that can really, figure that out for yourself. And you need to listen to your inner dialogue. Analyze how you navigate mistakes and mess ups and drifting off the path. Analyze those moments, right? See, man, am I a little bit too much rooted in shame and guilt? Am I so quick to beat myself down? And then you have to tell yourself after that, if you've become aware that that's what you're kind of doing, you have to tell yourself, well, that actually hurts me more than helps me. That doesn't do anything good for me. I'm just beating myself down. And if you beat somebody down, they're not going to want to keep going. And that's usually what we do with ourselves. We beat ourselves down so much that we get to a place where it's like, what's the point, right? What's the point? I'm no good. I'm a mistake. I'm not worthy. All those things are false. You made a mistake. You're not a mistake, right? Learn from it, reflect on it, grow from it, right? Use it as wisdom. And wisdom is only gained through experience. So just be mindful of that. Be mindful of that. It says, discipline rooted in shame eventually burns you out. Discipline rooted in grace builds sustainable habits. That's such a fact. When you have this rigid attachment to discipline, it's usually rooted in shame. I have to do this. I got to go this way. If I do this, then whoa, take a breath. Take a breath. Discipline isn't supposed to feel like a jail. That is not what it's supposed to feel like. It's not supposed to feel like a cage that you can't get out of, right? So if it is that, it's probably rooted in the wrong energy. It's probably rooted in shame and guilt and desperation. How can we start to embrace discipline in our lives? Rooted in grace, rooted in honesty, rooted in compassion for ourselves. Right? Because honestly, when you're able to, it's like that with anything in life, right? If you're a teacher and you're constantly beating down a kid, you're constantly yelling at a kid, you're constantly telling them that, they're not smart or they're not good enough, they're not going to want to learn. They're going to want to get out that environment. They're not going to want to deal with you, and that's going to cause a lot of friction, right? But the teachers that are very patient, that understand that sometimes the student is going to make a mistake. Sometimes the student's going to have questions. Sometimes the student isn't always going to get the best grade. Sometimes they're going to get frustrated. Sometimes they may act out. A teacher that understands that and can nurture that child and be there for that child and show that child that we're in this together and I'm going to help you understand things better. that entices the child to want to learn more. It's the same with yourselves. If your discipline is rooted in shame and guilt, and it feels like this constant fight and you're beating yourself down every time you make a mistake, it's going to be incredibly difficult to make discipline a regular practice in your life, right? But when it's rooted in grace, self-compassion, self-respect, right? Understanding you are a human being and this is your first time doing this thing called life. When it's rooted in that, it's going to be a lot more sustainable because it's rooted in the right energy, right? It's like fueling your car with the right gas. Be very mindful of that. Ask yourself, what am I fueling my car with? If my car takes premium gas, am I putting diesel in my vehicle expecting it to run the same? Expecting it to go to the distance, right? And only you can figure that out. So you got to get to the root of what's the fuel within myself that I'm trying to build a life out of, right? What is the fuel within myself that I am trying to build a life out of? And then when you get to the root of it, ask yourself, is this fuel sustainable for the life that I am trying to build, for the person that I am trying to become, right? Is it sustainable? And if it's not, well, we need to empty the tank and put the aligned fuel in there. And it's a process, but you can do it, absolutely. Brene Brown says, speak to yourself like someone you love. Speak to yourself like someone you love. Speak to yourself like somebody you love. Speak to yourself like a divine, unique soul. Speak to yourself as a worthy human being. Speak to yourself as a beautiful creation of God. Speak to yourself in that way. Real talk. Speak to yourself in that way. And anytime any speech comes out that isn't aligned with those things, we just don't accept it. We reframe and we replace. We don't beat ourselves down. We don't try to fight it. No. We just say, no, that isn't aligned with who we actually are. So we're not going to accept that speech. And then we're going to input what is aligned, right? Come on. A practice for when you mess up or fall short. Pause and reflect, right? Reflect on the situation and how you feel about it. This is so important, right? When you make a mistake, when you drift, right? Maybe you fall down in a certain area. Reflect on the situation and how you feel about it, right? Don't be so quick to beat yourself down or judge yourself. Reflect on it and really analyze how you're feeling. And then have an honest conversation with yourself about how you got there. Look at the steps leading up to, okay, what led me to making this decision? I didn't prioritize that part, or I definitely started to doom scroll a little bit, or I was just kind of pushing things off, procrastinating, or it was because I was, indulging in the wrong things, whatever it may be. Figure out how you got there. And then ask yourself, what would I say to a friend in this same situation? And then say that to yourself. And then after you say that to yourself, right, sit with that for a little bit. What would I say to my friend if they came to me and said, hey, I made this mistake? What would you say to them? Say that to yourself. And then recommit with a clear and loving intention, right? And then recommit right to the path. The path is not about always staying on it. It's about being aware of where it is so the times that you fall off, you always can get back, right? Because when you do fall off the path, if you're able to reflect on those moments, learn from them, grow from it, and get right back on the path, you just came back with some wisdom. And wisdom is one of the most important things for your growth. And wisdom is only gained through experience. So sometimes you got to fall off the path, learn the lesson to get back on the path more aligned, more elevated, right? So don't always view falling off the path as a negative thing. Sometimes falling off the path can be one of the greatest catalysts for your growth if met with the right perspective, if met with the right energy. And that's on you, my brothers and sisters. That is on you. Point number 2, momentum follows movement, not motivation. Momentum follows movement, not motivation. This is great. We often wait for motivation to strike before taking action. But the truth is, motivation is unreliable. What actually creates momentum is movement. You won't feel ready at the start, and that is okay. The act of moving forward, no matter how small, generates the clarity, energy, and direction you're looking for, right? Momentum follows movement, not motivation. You cannot just constantly wait for motivation to do the things that you feel like you should do. Motivation comes and goes. Motivation comes and goes. You are building a foundation on very shaky ground when you are trying to only do things when you're motivated to do it. Now, give yourself grace. Give yourself grace, right? Maybe in the past, you have been more focused on or more susceptible to only doing things when you're motivated. Give yourself grace for that so you can learn from it and grow from it. Now that you know better, let's move better, right? We're not focused on motivation. We're focused on movement. Even the smallest of steps can create lasting change. The smallest, tiniest steps add to your growth, add to the journey, right? Those very, very, very minimal things that we're so quick to look over, the very, very minimal moments of movement generate clarity. They generate energy in the right direction, right? So don't skip over them. Don't skip over them, right? So don't focus on motivation. Focus on movement. Let me just take a step, right? Let me figure out what's the next right step in this situation. That is one of my favorite framings that I do whenever I make a mistake, whenever I fall short in a certain area or I'm drifting. What is the next right step in this moment? What it helps me to do is it helps me to pause and reflect and not allow what just happened to make me start to cycle and just keep on taking my energy and attention away from this moment. No. I'm going to reflect. I'm going to pause. And then I'm going to ask myself, what is the next right step in this moment? And I'm just going to take that. I'm not going to say what's the next right 3, 4, 5 steps. I'm talking about one step right now. That one small step sometimes is all you need to get right back on track. And then you take another step and another step and another step. And before you know it, you're 10, 20, 30 steps in the right direction because you had the next right step mentality. Next right step mentality. You won't always make the right steps, but you can always make the next right step. I don't know if I worded that right. You won't always make the right steps, but you can always make the next one the right step. That's good. You will not always make the right steps, but you can always make the next one the right step with intention. So when you make a mistake, when you fall down, when you fall short, when you do something that isn't aligned, rather than dwelling on it and allowing it to circulate and ruin the rest of your day or your week, we're going to pause and reflect, and then we're going to ask ourselves, what is the next right step in this moment? And we're going to take that step with grace and love for ourselves. And then after we take that step, we're going to do it again and again and again. And that's how you create momentum and movement in the right direction. Come on. It says the first step feels heavy because you're breaking inertia. Once you start, the emotional resistance slowly begins to dissolve. That's so true. And for those who don't know what inertia is, it's an object at rest stays at rest. An object in motion stays in motion. So when you haven't been moving in a certain direction, or a part of your life has been very stagnant for a long time, and you want to shift, you want to change, the resistance you feel at the beginning is you breaking the inertia, right? An object at motion stays in motion. An object at rest stays at rest, right? So when an object in your life or a part of your life has been stagnant for a long time and you decide to start taking steps in moving that area, there's going to be some resistance at the beginning. And being able to understand what that resistance is allows you to navigate it in a healthier way. Because now you're not tripping like, oh my gosh, the reason I feel this resistance is because I can't do it. No. The reason you're feeling this resistance is just because you're doing something that hasn't been done in a long time or isn't familiar to you, or you're stepping into the unknown or stepping into uncertainty, right? Or you're just getting the rust off of this thing you haven't touched in a long time, right? It says you don't need to feel motivated to act, but taking action creates the motivation you're waiting for. That's so true. A lot of people wait for motivation without understanding that it's actually when you start to take those small steps, when you start to act, right? When you start to create some movement in the right direction, that's actually what generates the motivation, right? Motivation usually comes after the movement. We wait for motivation before we move, but we have it backwards. So when you make that shift, you'll start to see how just me taking action, me taking steps, right? Doing what I know is aligned with the highest version of myself, regardless of my circumstances, regardless of motivation or not. That actually is what generates motivation, right? And I speak from experience. When you start to get that momentum, right, and you're trotting in the right direction, you're gonna get a lot of spurts of motivation throughout that journey, right? But when you're sitting back waiting for it to come, man, you could be waiting a long time. You could be waiting a long time. And then you try to go to all of these things for motivation. Oh, I got to go watch this video. I got to go to social media. I got to read this book for motivation. You're just searching for motivation to get started. And it's a very, very tough thing to navigate and get out of. You know, I've been there. Michael Hyatt says you can't steer a parked car. You cannot steer a parked car. Get that thing moving, man. If you want to go in a better direction, get that car moving. You can't steer a parked car. You got to get the car moving. Even if you start moving in the wrong direction, at least that gives you the ability to start steering, right? But if you stay stagnant, if you're afraid to move, if you're afraid to actually try to go a certain direction, you'll never be able to steer. You'll never have any control over your life. You'll just be stuck in that parking spot, right? So you got to go. A practice for this is commit to 5 minutes of movement towards something that matters to you today. Whether it's journaling, stretching, sending that email, or making that call, just start. Set a timer and begin. Let movement come before motivation, whatever it may be, right? If you've been wanting to go to the gym, journal, meditate, read, you got to send an email, you got to have a conversation with somebody, whatever it may be, start small, but make that commitment today. I'm going to take a step towards that. I'm going to journal 1 sentence. I'm going to meditate for 1 minute, right? I'm going to open my email and draft it up, whatever it may be. Take steps in that direction. Start to create movement in the right direction, right? Start to create movement in the right direction. I want to break down inertia a little bit more for people. So inertia is a physics term, but it applies beautifully to life. It means an object at rest tends to stay at rest. An object in motion tends to stay in motion unless something changes that, right? So in life, inertia shows up like this. When you're not doing anything, it's easier to keep not doing something. When you are not doing anything, it's very easy to keep doing nothing. That's so true. But on the flip side, once you finally get started, it's easier to keep going. So in simple terms, getting started is often the hardest part, but once you begin, your energy builds and momentum kicks in, right? So remember that. Your energy builds and momentum will kick in once you get the ball rolling. That's why I do think starting is, in any endeavor, I do think starting, some people will say maintaining or keeping, whatever it is. For me, I do think starting is probably the hardest part of any journey that you're trying to go down. I think it's the starting. When I wanted to start content and a podcast and all that stuff, it was definitely the starting that was a lot more difficult than actually being in the middle of it. And every part of it has its own, different things you have to navigate, different complexities. But for me, I think starting for sure, because it's just like, where do I start? What do I do? How do I do it? Right? You have all of these questions and your mind is racing and you don't know what to do. You have no sense of direction, and it can be so paralyzing at times. But I've learned you got to simplify it. You have to get out of your head and you just have to take one step. People underestimate the clarity that can come from one step, right? Because you think that all of the clarity is all of these things in your mind that you've created, and all of these things in your mind is so many things. You think that it's going to come from a multitude of different steps and all of these leaps that you have to take, without realizing that, no, sometimes it's just that one step to get the ball rolling. So take that one step today. And then let's break down the you can't steer a parked car, right? So you can't steer a parked car. What does that really mean? This quote is a metaphor for life, growth, or decision making. So it's saying you can't figure out where to go if you don't start moving. You cannot figure out where to go if you don't start moving. If a car is parked, no matter how much you turn the wheel, it is not going anywhere. But once you start driving, even slowly, you can start to adjust, turn, change lanes, or redirect. If you overthink, procrastinate, or wait to feel ready, you're like a car in park. But when you take action, even if it's imperfect, you give yourself direction, momentum, and new information that helps guide your next step. That's all you need to know right now. End of the podcast. No, I'm playing. I'm joking. Point number 3. Accountability is a form of self-respect. Accountability is a form of self-respect. Following through on what you said you would do isn't about being perfect. It's about being in alignment and having integrity. Every time you honor your word to yourself, you reinforce the belief that you're trustworthy and you're serious about your growth. This builds self-worth, and the more you value yourself, the more you will take care of yourself. Come on. Every time you honor your word to yourself, you reinforce the belief that you're trustworthy and you're serious about your growth. Every time you honor your word to yourself. And that's what needs to be in the back of your mind when you're, thinking of doing something or thinking of not doing something, right? Every time I keep my word to myself, I'm reinforcing the belief that I'm trustworthy. I'm reinforcing the belief in myself. I'm reinforcing how serious I am about becoming the best version of myself every time I keep my word to myself. Right? So keep that at the forefront of your mind as you're navigating, and know you're not going to be perfect, right? You're not going to be perfect, but it's about understanding that holding yourself accountable is a form of self-respect. And like it says, this builds self-worth. And the more you value yourself, the more you will take care of yourself. The more you value yourself, the more you will do things that honor who you are and who you're trying to become. 1,000%. 1,000%. Look at our society. Right? Look at the way that we handle and treat things that we view as more valuable. So it's the same with yourself. As you start to value yourself more, you're going to treat yourself better. As you start to value yourself more, you're going to do more things that are aligned with the highest version of you. And how do you start to value yourself more? You start to value your word more, right? Because I show up for myself. I'm somebody who shows up for myself. I'm somebody who takes care of myself. I'm somebody that's trustworthy. I'm somebody that really believes in the vision, right? And you have real receipts to look at, right? This isn't just, saying anything. No, this is from practical things in your life that you have done over a certain amount of time where you could look back and say, no, I am this, right? When I said I was going to start doing these things or stop doing these things, I actually kept my word to myself. No, I wasn't always perfect, but I always kept showing up. And I kept that intention at the forefront of my mind. And that's what helped me to keep growing into the person I am now, where I am trustworthy. I do believe in myself. I do believe in the vision. And I really do live this life. Internally and externally, I really live this life. So, come on. It says consistency isn't just about progress. It's about identity. You start to believe internally that I'm someone who shows up. This is in the book Atomic Habits, right? It's not just about habit change. It's about identity change. You need to start identifying as somebody who shows up, as somebody who keeps their word, right? As somebody who has integrity, as somebody who's for real about their vision and their dream and their goals. And so as you continue to show up for yourself and you're consistent with the little things that you should be doing, you're reinforcing that identity more, right? And the more you reinforce that identity, the more it's going to be easier to implement and keep doing things in your life that are aligned with that identity. It's going to be a lot easier to keep your word to yourself when you identify as somebody who's trustworthy. It's going to be a lot easier to keep showing up for yourself when you identify as someone who shows up. So be mindful of that. And it says broken promises to yourself quietly erode confidence over time, but every kept promise rebuilds it. Broken promises to yourself quietly erode your confidence over time. Very minimally, right? And we kind of just overlook these things, but it really comes out when we want to take that step, when we want to take action, we want to pursue a dream or a goal, right? And that internal resistance comes up, that internal voice that is like, bro, you're not for real about this. You can't do it. You're like, where is that coming from? You got to look back at your life. Do you keep breaking promises to yourself? Do you keep telling yourself you're going to do stuff and then not do it? And the more and more you do that, you are just reinforcing that you are not for real about the things that you say. So now when you have a dream, when you have a goal, and you actually want to take steps down that path, your internal dialogue will be like, hold on, bruh. That's not who we are. You're not for real about that. It sounds good, but that's not really who you are, bro. That's not really who you are. And that's really the challenging part. When you've been that way for so long, it's saying, you know what? Yeah, that's who I've been, but I'm going to decide to become somebody new. And so when that voice comes up and says, that's not who you are, you say, yes, it is. And then you take that step. Yes, it is who I am. And every kept promise rebuilds that confidence, right? So as you keep taking steps and showing up for yourself and keeping your word to yourself, that confidence is going to grow internally. And it's what's going to allow you to, keep expanding and evolving and, taking steps and taking leaps of faith in your path. Come on. Abraham Lincoln said, discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most. What do you want now and what do you want most? That's a question that you should continue to ask yourself, right? Because there's a lot of times in the now we want certain things, but are those things aligned with what we want most, right? And what we want most is just to be the best version of ourselves every single day. So a better question is what I'm about to do aligned with me being the best version of myself? Simple yes or no. Now, this is going back to the beginning of the podcast, graceful growth. There are going to be moments in your journey where you ask yourself, is what I'm about to do aligned with the highest version of myself or no? And the answer is no. And you still decide to do it. There are going to be moments where you do that. And it's in those moments where you must first give yourself grace. You are a human being. You're not meant to be perfect, but you must also hold yourself accountable and really be honest about that moment, that decision, learn from it, reflect on it, and then take the next right step. And that is how you grow gracefully, with accountability, with self-respect, right? Without belittling yourself. Growth should never feel like you're belittling yourself. Growth should never feel like you're beating yourself down. Growth should never feel like you're guilt tripping yourself. You're judging yourself. That's not what growth should feel like. So if it starts to feel like that, you gotta get still. You gotta start looking internally and say, oh, whoa. What is the energy that's fueling my growth right now? Because it shouldn't feel like this. It doesn't mean you're not gonna have difficulties. You're not gonna go through all different types of emotions. But y'all know what I mean. Like, if every time you make a mistake or every time you're trying to grow, bro, like we said, it feels like this battle. It feels like you're beating yourself down. You're going against you every day. It's tough, man. It's tough. It's a lot of energy you're giving to things that aren't even your growth. It's just the battle within, the battle within. A practice is each night write down, or even in the morning, write down 1 to 3 promises that you will keep to yourself, either for tomorrow or for the day. All right, if I do this at night, all right, wake up, for instance, wake up at 6 a.m., 30 minutes of cardio, right? Or meditate for 5 minutes. Prioritize stretching at night. Go to the gym, right? Things like that. And then at the end of the day, I'm going to look at that list and be like, man, I did that, I did that, I did that, I did that. And I just reinforced that confidence within myself that I show up. I keep my word. I said I was going to do something, I did it. I said I was going to do something, I did it. So now whenever the thought of, dang, am I really for real about this journey? Am I really for real about my goals and my dreams comes up? I got a track record of yeses. Yes, I'm for real. I show up for myself. I tell myself I'm going to do something, I do it. That's it. It's that simple. Come on. With grace, with accountability, you will grow. Come on. Point number 4. The next right step is often the most simple one. It says, we overcomplicate growth by thinking we need to reinvent ourselves overnight. But often the next right step is something small, practical, and clear. It's usually something we already know deep down. It says complication is a form of avoidance. Simplicity cuts through the noise and brings clarity. This is so true. Complication is often a form of avoidance. We make things harder than they need to be, not because we're incapable, but because somewhere deep down we're afraid of failing, afraid of being seen trying, afraid of choosing wrong. So instead of acting, we analyze, we overthink, we build these big, elaborate plans that sound productive, but in reality, they delay action. That's what complication does. It gives us an excuse to stay stuck while feeling like we're making progress. Man. And that's why the quote, simplicity is the highest form of sophistication, is so prevalent. It's so true. Simplicity is the highest form of sophistication. Complication is a form of avoidance. We like to overthink. We like to make things very complex, right? To make us feel like we're being productive. But in actuality, we're being stagnant and we're not doing anything except thinking. And it just creates being stuck in the same position, right? But simplicity is clarity. Simplicity is clarity. Simplicity says, what can I do right now with what I have? It doesn't mean easy, it means essential. It gets us back to the root. When you simplify, you stop trying to fix everything at once. You stop needing all the answers. You focus on the next right thing. And that brings a kind of peace, a groundedness that complication can never give you. Right? Simplicity is the highest form of sophistication. You don't need to figure out everything right now. You don't need to reinvent yourself all at once. You just need to take the next right step. One step. That's it. Simplicity is the highest form of sophistication. While person B is sitting over here overanalyzing, overthinking, making this, complex narrative in their mind and all these elaborative plans, and person A is over here just taking one step at a time, keeping it very simple. It may look like person B is being more productive, but in actuality, person A is, right? Person B is being stagnant. Person A is actually moving. So you have to ask yourself, which person do I want to be? Do I want to sit here and just think and make things complicated and just be stagnant and feeling productive, but not really being productive, right? Because complication is just a form of avoidance. Or do I want to be like person A, where I'm taking the smallest of steps, but at least I'm moving and actually being productive and actually taking strides toward the best version of myself? Because movement brings clarity, not thinking. Simplicity brings clarity, not complication. So be mindful of that. It says you don't need 50 steps. You need one step with intention. Right? A lot of people think do more, but often less is more. Truly, less is more. You don't need 50 steps. You need one step with intention. Overthinking, overanalyzing, complicating things will make you think about 50, 100, 200 steps that you have to make right now. Simplifying it will make you understand that I just need to take one step done with intention. Come on. Start where you are. Use what you have. Do what you can. Start where you are. Use what you have and do what you can. Start where you are. Use what you have and do what you can. Here's the beautiful thing. For what most people really want in life, they actually have everything they need. It's internal. Tap into that. Use what you have internally first before you start to try to cling to all of these things externally, saying I need this, saying I need that, I got to get here. Start where you are and use what you have. Start right where your feet are and use what you have internally. And do what you can with that, because let me tell you, that right there in itself can change your whole life. It can change everything. It can change everything. So a practice for this is ask yourself each morning, what's the next right thing I can do today? Then do that. Nothing more, nothing less. Focus on the present step, not the whole journey. Just focus on that. What's the next right thing I can do today? What's the next right step I can take today? And let me just take that. If it's one very, very, very small step, and that's what you did, that's success. That is success. When you understand that success is not about these grand, overcomplicated, overcomplex things, and it's actually in the small, incremental moments, you stop viewing success as a destination. You start viewing it as a journey, as a beautiful journey of small, intentional moments, small, intentional steps. And each step is compiling for your success, right? And point number 5, the last point, self-awareness is the root of graceful progress. To take the next right step and hold yourself accountable with grace, you have to know yourself. Awareness allows you to catch the patterns, excuses, and self-sabotage before they take over. Come on. That's why self-awareness is so important. Self-awareness helps you to catch the patterns, catch the excuses, and the self-sabotage before it happens, before they take over. When you've become aware of yourself, your reactions, right, your internal state, you start to understand yourself better, and you start to be able to catch on to when an excuse is coming up, when you're about to self-sabotage a certain opportunity or situation, right? When a certain limited pattern is about to go on a loop. And because you've cultivated that awareness and you've implemented different practices from working on yourself, you're able to, in those moments, consciously choose a new direction, consciously not allow those things to surface up and take over the wheel. And that's where your power is. Like we said, we're not trying to get rid of these things. We are trying to shift our relationship and understanding and perspective to these things so we can navigate them in a healthier way. You are going to have times where limited emotions, limited thoughts come up. But because you've cultivated awareness, you've implemented practices, you've been growing, you're able to navigate those situations and moments a lot healthier. You're able to not allow those emotions and thoughts take over the wheel and start taking you in a direction that isn't aligned because you've done the work, right? And then that's when it starts becoming this inner battle. It starts becoming this inner battle, and it starts to become this inner relationship. Now you have a relationship with every emotion, even the limiting ones, right? And when you have a relationship with somebody, a healthy relationship with somebody, that's where you guys can have honest dialogue and hold each other accountable. It's the same with your emotions. When you have healthy relationships with all of your emotions, even the fear, even the anxiety, right? When those things come up, rather than feeling like it's a fight, rather than trying to, beat these things out of you, because you have a healthy relationship with them, it's a honest, healthy inner dialogue. Hey, fear. Hey, anxiety. I feel you. I hear you. I'm going to lean into you. I see where you're coming from. And this is how we're going to navigate it. Not, oh my God, it's coming up. Fear, you got to go away. Anxiety, you got to go away. This is the worst thing ever. Oh my gosh, why am I feeling so worried? And you just start fighting. And it's just like this battle. You're trying to get rid of it. You're trying to, whoa, 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 whoa. Sometimes you just got to do that. Whoa. Let me just take a step back. Take a step back. Reflect, pause, and take the next right step. I have no idea what that was, but I love y'all. And that's what that was. But yeah, so I hope that gives you some understanding. It says you can't change what you're unwilling to see. Awareness gives you the power to choose differently. You cannot change what you're unwilling to see, right? So when you cultivate awareness, it gives you the power to actually start choosing differently. That's why awareness is so important. How do you cultivate awareness? You got to spend time with yourself. You got to start to look within, because if you are constantly being distracted by everything going on out here, if your awareness and attention, if your attention is constantly being, taken by all of these things out here, you're never going to be aware of what's going on internally. And remember, your external reality is a reflection of your internal reality. So the only way for you to start becoming aware of what is going on in your life, your patterns, your excuses, your self-sabotage, your limiting beliefs, your limiting emotions, is to cultivate stillness, pause, and look internally. It says grace starts with honesty. Being real about what's working and what isn't is how you reclaim your power. In your life, you need to be real about what is working and what isn't. You need to be completely honest with yourself about those things. What is working in my life and what isn't? What relationships are working in my life and which ones aren't? What habits are working in my life and which ones aren't? That is the first step. We don't need to make a change right now, but we need to first become aware of what's working and what's not working, because you can't change something you're not aware of. A lot of people don't even realize certain things in their life aren't working because they haven't cultivated the space to actually analyze and look, right? And actually ask those questions. That's why it's so important. And like Carl Jung says, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Until you make the unconscious things in your life conscious, until you become aware of all of the things going on in your life, inside of your mind, inside of your body, all of these things will direct your life and you will just call it fate. You will just think it is the way it is. No, it's not just the way it is. It's just the way you are. And you can change. It's not just the way it is. It's just the way you are. And you can change with awareness, with grace, with self-accountability, with a growth mindset, right? With daily practices, with little tiny steps. You can change. And when you change, everything changes. When you change, your life changes. When you change, everything changes for you. Everything changes for you. You hold the key. Remember that you hold the key. But the problem is the key is internal. Not even the problem. The thing is the key is internal. You hold the key, but the key is internal, right? So a lot of us don't even realize we hold the key. And then a lot of us search for the key in the external world. Well, those are the two mess ups right there. So one, you have to become aware that, oh, I hold the key. And then two, you have to say, well, let me start to search internally for that key. Let me start to unlock the doors that I have the keys to, rather than giving away my power and waiting for something externally to unlock these doors. Nah, you got to do it. You got to do it. And that's how you become empowered. Empowered. Even that word, when I say empowered, it feels like it's coming from something internally. Empowered. The only way to feel empowered is to tap in to the things that you have within. Come on. And you can do that. It says, set a weekly reflection ritual as a practice. What did I learn about myself this week? Where did I avoid accountability? Where did I extend grace? Write it out. No judgment, just observation and understanding. I like that. Where did I avoid accountability and where did I extend my grace? That is a beautiful, beautiful practice. So, no matter where you are right now, remember this. You're not meant to have it all figured out. Life meets you in motion. The next right step doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to be true to you. And when you pair that step with accountability rooted in self-respect and grace rooted in self-love, you build a life you can actually trust. You'll stumble, you'll pause, you'll question yourself. But as long as you keep showing up with honesty, intention, and compassion, you're not off track. You're in process. You're becoming. And that right there is more than enough. Keep going, but be kind to yourself along the way, my beautiful brothers and sisters. And remember, most importantly, the most important thing is to take everything with a grain of salt. I will see you guys next week. Love y'all. I appreciate y'all. We gone.